Let's talk through detachments, stratagems and formations, and which ones are looking strongest for each army with a choice in Warhammer 40k. And just quickly before we start, if you want some snazzy dice with the channel logo on, the link's down in the video description. They're pretty nice quality ones made by the Baron of Dice and can ship worldwide from the USA. Hello and welcome back to Auspex Tactics, where today I thought it would be interesting to take a look at some numbers and see which detachments each army is using in competitive play and has claim to fame to being the strongest choice for each army that actually can choose between multiple. In 10th edition, detachments have been a whole new way of army construction compared with 9th, really quite a big shake-up on the previous sub-faction rules system that they had, rather than having a massive amount of generic options and then just a few flavour options layered on top. Armies are now mainly about their datasheets, then have one faction rule, and then the stratagems enhancement and a detachment rule that all get subbed out one for another, meaning that perhaps more so than 9th edition, running your army as one detachment or another is really quite a big choice in game, and could drive the armies to play really quite differently. I think it's been interesting to see that Games Workshop actually seem to want to keep the detachments balanced a little bit. We have actually seen detachment updates that boost weaker ones for certain armies, say like the good buff that the Sons of Sanguinius got when nobody was playing it, taking the Blood Angels to be quite strong. And I feel like that's perhaps a good omen for the future. Games Workshop, to at least some extent, wants to try and make different viable ways to play for each army in the endgame. For this video, I thought it would be interesting to take a look at some numbers. There's a few sources that collate win rates and tournament wins for detachments. This video is broadly based off data from StatCheck 40k and Meta Monday, which I'll link down in the video description. And for this one, given that it's about comparing detachments, I'm only going to talk through the armies that actually have a choice between them. Obviously, if you're say playing Eldari at the moment, your only option is Battle Host, so that's going to be the de facto winner. Some of them are genuinely incredibly well balanced against each other by the numbers. For some armies though, it's basically one detachment is the only one played. I thought we'd talk through win rates, amount of actual event wins, and how many people are playing them, and then just talk through one of the detachments that might have claim to fame as one of the strongest, even though I do feel that that's quite a judgment call for plenty of armies. Jumping straight into it though, and for the forces of the Adeptus Astartes Codex Space Marines, there's basically 4 detachments that seem at least kind of level. Gladius is the most played for them at tournaments with a 39% win rate, Ironstorm Spearhead the next at 42, then Vanguard Spearhead at 40, and finally Firestorm Assault Force at 45%, but this one is the least played beyond the more rarely played ones, which are the other 4, at least for the core codex. Standard Space Marines are struggling quite a bit at the moment. They've only had the 2 tournament wins, one with Gladius and one with Ironstorm since the Pariah Nexus update came out. Perhaps the biggest impact of that one for the Space Marines was nerfing the Ironstorm Spearhead really quite a lot. I genuinely rate these 4 options as kind of well balanced against each other for the core codex right now. They've all got power and the capacity that they can win events, but just in general Space Marines aren't really doing it all that well right now. With all their win rates ranging between 39 and 45% for their good detachments, it's not really a good news story. Just to arbitrarily pick one of them, I thought we'd go with the Vanguard Spearhead. I wouldn't necessarily say it is stronger than the rest, but I feel like it holds its own fine. The core rule for this one is Shadow Masters, -1 to hit, and the benefit of cover greater than 12 inches away, so a debuff against range, and perhaps the best enhancement is the Blade Driven Deep, giving one of your infantry units Infiltrate, which can often be used with Marnius Calgar and a big unit of aggressors with an Apothecary Biologist, giving you a terrifying Death Star unit in the midboard. They've got some fairly nice supporting stratagem tricks as well. Calculated Feint can allow you to recoil from enemy charges and could be a big game-changing swing. And Guerrilla Tactics give the Astartes a way to return to reserves. They can be pretty helpful with objective type things for things like Inceptors or perhaps some Phobos Marines, but can be kind of massive with Devastator Centurions, which can be given Deep Strike with Uriel Ventress. You can have a Centurion squad warping around the board deleting things. Next up we've got the Adeptus Mechanicus, who maybe have a bit more of a clear winner for this one. The Skitarii Hunter cohort is easily the most played in competitive play and also seems to have the best win percentage as well, winning 53% of games versus the next nearest rivals in the cohort Cybernetica at 50% and Bradzone Core at 44%. The other 2 are pretty rarely used. There's 3 tournament wins for them so far, and all of them with the Skitarii Hunter cohort, so pretty much a dominant victory for that one. Like the Space Marines, the Skitarii Hunter cohort is pretty much the stealthy sneaky AdMech version. The core rule gives your Skitarii and Iron Striders the stealth keyword, and Sicarian units get the benefit of cover against longer range as well, even in the open. Again, handy enough to debuff firepower armies. The supporting options for this detachment are pretty massive though. The Cantic Thrallnet became absolutely enormous once the Doctriners got buffed. This one gives your Skitarii infantry both Doctriners, so you could have things like AP -1 and +1 to hit on the go at the same time. Also with the Assault keyword as well, so faster and far more dangerous. And Clandestine Infiltrator can give you both Infiltrators and Scouts, giving you some very annoying Skirmish Vanguard or something in the midboard. Otherwise, they've got another Return to Reserve stratagem, a Can't Shoot Me at greater than 18 inches stratagem, which is powerful for keeping things alive on objectives, and a pop-up reactive 5+ Feel No Pain. That can make one unit excessively tanky, just kind of annoying to deal with 2 wound infantry with that, with big chaff squads of perhaps Sterilizers or Skystalkers, and it could make Sidonian Dragoons a lot more of a pain to deal with. Moving on, and for the Adeptus Custodes, again there's a pretty clear winner here. The Shield Host has a 49% win rate and is by far the most played. Talons of the Emperor is in second with 44%, and the Auric Champion's character focus one is 39% despite the buffs in the balanced data slate. The Middle Maiden Task Force is barely played, though it was interesting that so far the only actual tournament victory for the Custodes has come with that one. I think I'd far more put that down to one strong player doing well with them, as opposed to saying it's somehow amazing or something though. Basically all the other top placings have been with Shield Host where there have been them, though in general they tend to be maybe a bit more of a mid-table bully than a tournament-topping army, doing well at mid-levels of play, but not quite so stand out against the best of the best. Shield Host would already at least pretty playable, though it got a very nice boost in the balanced data slate, rather than basically having one big turn of essentially Custodes calling the war and getting extra dangerous. They instead get to choose either extra critical hits each turn, or extra AP if you happen to be fighting against a super tough save opponent with a bunch of 2+ armor, for example. Either way, it's a nice guaranteed damage increase that works with Martial Qatar. Several of the enhancements are pretty interesting, including the Castellan's Mark for redeploys. The Pantopter specs is fairly easy to include though for 5 points, giving you ignores cover on the unit's ranged attacks, which I think is kind of big when you're hitting with some fairly punchy damage to things that are only AP1. Most of the stratagems are probably rated as usable but not crazy standout on their own. There's one for a helpful -1 to hit in melee, which can occasionally be kind of big, though it was very helpful that the battle tactic rules change for discounted command points happened, given that now shield captains can actually access all of them, when previously they could only access the single battle tactic one. Next up we've got the Tyranids, and again these ones are currently pretty well balanced. The 3 that are used in competitive play the most since the update are Invasion Fleet, Vanguard Onslaught and Synaptic Nexus, of which Invasion Fleet and Vanguard Onslaught are the most played ones and Synaptic Nexus is the least. The others aren't unplayable but kind of rarely used, and in particular Unending Swarm has seen a lot less people using it ever since you can no longer spawn a squad of Gaunts every turn. For actual top tournament wins, one's used Vanguard Onslaught and 2 have used Invasion Fleets. Between all that for the win percentages and the tournament wins, by the stats I'd say either Vanguard Onslaught or Invasion Fleets could happily be nominated for the top spot. I've chosen to talk about Vanguard Onslaught here, again a slightly arbitrary pick. This is the one that helps out with Vanguard Invader keywords in the Tyranid army, which is really quite a lot of them. Basically anything that burrows, has wings, or is a Genestealer or Lictor type thing now. They'll get to advance and charge and fall back and charge, so can have some really big threat ranges to mess with enemy units. There's a few interesting enhancements, including this Hunting Grounds one, which means that reserve units have to take battle shock tests, and that can be really disruptive if the opponent wants to drop a unit and then score a secondary or something. Might be worth giving that to a Neurotyrant lurking in the backfield. They've got a particularly powerful Can't Shoot Me stratagem called Unseen Lurkers, and it's kind of big to be able to make something like a Winged Hive Tyrant or Trigon or something untargetable outside of 18, and it goes down to just 6 inches if you use it on a lone operative like a Lictor. You can also return units to reserve as well, 2 Vanguard Invader units going back into Strategic Reserve, which is always big for scoring things and maybe Tyrannid Gargoyles and stuff doing shenanigans. It's pretty big for Morlocks as well, where you could have them burrow on and off the board, causing some mortal wound carnage. Again, that one could be kind of fun. For the Orks, prior to the update, it was Buddy Boys leading the way and then Green Tide, but they took some pretty serious nerfs in the last balance change. A big points hike to Mega Knobs and a rules nerf to them, and Green Tide taking lots of hits. With those two quite so brutally beaten down, it looks like Warhorde is now the single most played and the one with pretty much joint most win rate. Even this one's only a 44% overall though. The Orks are not a particularly easy faction to win with for the average player. Following that, it looks like Dreadmob is actually the second most played detachment, which definitely has its fun factor and can be scary with a bunch of looters, but that's only got win rates of 41%, and Bully Boys are still persisting for some, with 41 there, and Green Tide in 4th at 45, though it's played vastly less than, say, Warhorde. Looks like since the balance update at time of recording, there's no outright tournament wins for them. The Orks did have the sort of controversial win and then drop out of Games Workshop's Tacoma Open tournament. That was with Warhorde, and I did notice the Dreadmob list went 6-0 at the 223-player LSO, which is pretty much an equally impressive achievement as an average GT win. I still probably crown Warhorde as overall best though, by being the most played and having one of the best win percentages. Warhorde was basically the update of the Orky Index detachment, a nice simple melee boost one with sustained hits 1 on everything in close combat, a nice uncomplicated damage boost that makes all the boys fight harder. There's a few usable enhancements, including Follow Me Lads for a +2 to the move characteristic, which can be a big deal when you're trying to make long charges out of transports and things. I think plenty of the stratagems are pretty powerful too. +2 to advance and charge rolls for 1 CP for infantry can give you a ridiculous surge of movement in the war, and Ardous Nails for a -1 to wounds is a really good defensive stratagem to have, perhaps particularly nice on high toughness Squighog boys. For the Drukhari, they might not have a Codex yet, though Games Workshop was nice enough to take pity on them and give them a whole new detachment when they were struggling early in 10th. They do rather seem to have been enjoying their new toys, with the Sky Splinter having one of the best win rates of any detachment in 40k right now, a big 59% or so, a truly fearsome adversary to overcome. Real Space Raiders are generally pretty rarely played, but still seem to be doing fine enough for those who choose to use them. I guess they might be a little bit more tempting if you wanted to go for a Talos heavy list. So far since the balance update, looks like they've got a big 6 tournament wins, all of them with the Sky Splinter, and pretty impressive numbers for a faction that doesn't have the highest player rate in the world. The Sky Splinter is the detachment that focuses on Drukhari transports, which is usually their typical way of making war. The core rule gives benefits for models that have jumped out of a transport and then attacked, getting Ignores cover or Lance for melee weapons, and in particular that Lance is absolutely savage on things like Witches and Incubi. They can be delivered to extremely long charges with the Pounce on the Prey stratagem. You can move a Raider or Venom up the board, have them hop out, and then they're still able to charge after that, getting a fairly ridiculously long, around about 22 to 24 inch threat range or so. There's an enhancement that can prevent Overwatch, which is pretty big for those kind of units making melee, and plenty of other really useful transport stratagems. One Night Shield one is rather good to get a 4+ invulnerable save, always good to basically be able to rotate ion shields like the Imperial Knights and make one transport unusually annoying to bring down. For the Tau Empire, they feel like another faction that broadly Games Workshop has managed to get right, at least for the core faction. Really quite balanced numbers between Montcar, Retaliation, Cadre and Kauyon. It seems that with the stats the way that they are at the moment, Montcar and Retaliation both have a sort of 47% win rate, though both of them are played significantly more than Kauyon, even if that one has a slightly higher win rate at 50%. The Croup one was seeing at least some success when the Codex first came out, but with kind of high points values and Games Workshop hitting it with a massive nerf for the reinforcement style stratagem that they had, it doesn't look like basically anyone's choosing to play it currently. For actual tournament wins, looks like Retaliation Cadre has been punching through just a little bit more than the others. 3 wins with that, 1 with Montcar and 1 with Kauyon. And just based on that, as a deciding factor, I'll go with that for the mentioned one, though realistically I think that they're all very strong and very playable. For the Retaliation Cadre, this is the battlesuit focused one, definitely getting a big glow up when the Crisis Suits and Commanders dropped in cost, as did the broadsides. The main rule is a nice damage boost up close, getting +1 strength and an extra pip of AP when you're within 12 inches and 6 inches respectively. Perhaps particularly nice for things like Riptides battling on the front line, or things like Star-sized Crisis Suits doing daring manoeuvres. A good enhancement is the Starflare Ignition system for 20 points to have your unit jumping on and off the board. Could be quite nice with a missile pod style unit to allow you to inflict some damage at longish range and then make sure that you get sight on an optimal target next turn. There's the big jump shoot jump stratagem for 1 command points to allow a Crisis Suit to move out, shoot and then hide behind terrain. And there's the scary close drop with the shortened blade, allowing a battlesuit unit to deep strike just outside of 3 inches, which occasionally can be really big for objectives, but can just be very nasty for getting the battlesuit buffs activated for guaranteed. You could have an all-in anti-tank unit with some forged suits led by Farsight, for example, to discount the stratagem. Next up for the Chaos Space Marines, there's maybe a bit more variety in play, though it does look like the Codex favourite when it came out, the Renegade Raiders, is still in ascendancy. Renegade Raiders has a 50% win rate and is also the most played. The next most played is Soulforged Warpack for 45%, and then Pact-Bound Zealots for 51%. Veterans of the Long War trails after. Very low win rates on that though, and less played, and the others are played even fewer. It was interesting though that Chaos Cult has a noticeably weirdly high win rate despite almost no one trying to make it work. The guy from the 40K Dirtbags YouTube channel managed to win the enormous LSO tournament with that though, and can be a disturbingly tricky board control type army with a bunch of accursed cultists if you can master it clearly. For actual tournament wins beyond that, 2 have been with Renegade Raiders and 2 with Pact-Bound Zealots. I think out of that, between the stats, I pretty much give the overall strongest attachment to be kind of even between Renegades and Pact-Bound. Soulforged Warpack is kind of fun and easy to use with some big damage buffs, but doesn't really seem to quite have the same sort of success. Maybe just using chosen play rate as a tiebreaker, I've talked about the Renegade Raiders. This is the one that's sort of vaguely Red Corsairs themed, and it gives all the Heretic Astartes the assault keyword on their ranged weapons and extra AP when they target things on objectives by 1, that bit applying to both range and melee, and it makes the damage of a lot of units extra savage, things like AP2 autocannons or AP-2 legionary chainswords with the 4 rerolls to wound against them. Having access to an Armour of Contempt equivalent with Unfailingly Obdurate is a nice one as well, always good to have as a reactive stratagem, could be good on things like Vindicators with their 2+ saves. And they also get on really well with transports. They've got several synergies with them, including this Ruinous Raid stratagem, 1 command point for rerolling all hits and wounds when you disembark, to further toast those enemies on objectives. The detachment's also weirdly great with Rubric Marines as well. They also get to have 4 wound rerolls against things on objectives, so getting assault and extra AP with that just makes them obscene. Next up we've got the Dark Angels, and unlike the standard Codex Space Marines, they seem to really have the one detachment that they prefer, and that's the Gladius Task Force from the core Codex. Leaps and bounds ahead of all the rest of their detachments, by far the most played with a 55% win rate. The next most played is their Inner Circle Task Force from their Codex, which does have some interesting buffs for them, but it seems it just really doesn't seem to come together for people, only a dismal 34% win rate there. They have currently the single most access to detachments in the game right now. It still seems that a few people are having success with the Ironstorm Spearhead. They quite like that with a Storm Raven and a Landspeeder Darkshroud combo. In any case though, a clear win for the Gladius. They've already won 3 tournaments with it, and seems to do absolutely great for them. The Gladius Task Force is the generally Ultramarines themed one out of the core Codex, giving you access to 3 different turns of combat doctrines, advance and shoot with Devastator, fall back shoot and charge with Tactical, and advance and charge with the Assault Doctrine, all of which can be really powerful, and you can flex into them for 1 command point on any unit, and that's really quite a powerful ability. Advance and charge I think is particularly relevant to the Dark Angels, given that they enjoy their Deathwing Knights and Inner Circle Companions. Both of these units tend to be played in more competitive lists than not. Otherwise, if you're playing Gladius Task Force, Fire Discipline on a big scary shooting unit is near auto-include. Between this and Devastator Doctrine and Oath of Moment, you can get a ridiculous amount of sustained lethal hits, and it's pretty excellent on Aggressors or Hellblasters, or maybe Eradicators as a further option. Otherwise, for stratagems, a standout one is Honour the Chapter. This one gives you Lance in melee and an extra pip of AP if you're in Assault Doctrine as well. Again, +1 to wound and an extra pip of AP just turns good assault units into truly dangerous ones. Very nice on the AP2 weapons of their Terminators and Companions. For their bitter rivals in the Space Wolves, previously this was absolutely Stormlance Task Force all the way, but following the update for Champions of Russ, they now get to start with one of those sagas active and kind of became a better version of Black Templars, at least on the core rule, as you get 1 powerful Feel No Pain or melee buff, and then you still have the chance to actually activate the others with actions of your heroes. The Stormlance has a 55% win, and the Champions of Russ has 57%. They're pretty much equally played in competitive play. And so far, the Space Wolves have racked up 4 tournament wins, 3 with Stormlance and 1 with Champions. It does look both of them are realistically kind of even in power. I could have happily talked about either of them. I'll focus on the Stormlance for this one, as the slightly more plays and the more tournament wins. This one's essentially the White Scar style one from the core Codex. You get to charge if you've advanced or fallen back. Advance and charge is massive for Thunderwolves in particular, to be able to zoom them up the board and around terrain. And the rest of the detachment has some pretty massive support for mounted units, in theory aimed at bikes, but works great on Thunderwolves. There's a big -1 to hit and wounds debuff at range, which makes them ridiculously tanky. A nice reactive move 1 to be able to backpedal 6 inches if it makes sense. And a big 2 command point massive advance move 1, which could see you pull off some charges that are far beyond what you'd expect. The enhancements are at least fairly usable, as a Hunter's Instincts is one of the most interesting. This one allows you to arrive from strategic reserves with your unit round 1. Could allow some Thunderwolves to turn up on the flank straight away, and I believe that you can use that one with rapid ingress, unlike most other similar rules. Overall, a very fast moving and very hard hitting army indeed. For the Genestealer Cults, as often seems to be the case with them, there's very little data. They're a niche army to start with, though I feel like it wasn't really helped with their Codex, and they were perhaps played even less than normal after their Codex dropped, as in terms of sheer impact and excitement of the detachments, quite a lot of people felt that it was a downgrade. Overall, it's looking like they're one of the weaker factions in 40k, at least prior to their latest update. Win rate's kind of low, and people seem to be at least fairly evenly split between all 5 of their detachments on the competitive scene, trying out a good bunch of them. Seems that Biosantic Brood Surge is the most played at win rates of about 40%, Hoster Ascension at 36%, then Xenocreed Congregation at 46%, Outlander Claw at 48%, and Brood Brother Auxilia trailing at 32% for the Allied Guard version. The only tournament win so far has been with Outlander Claw, and it does seem to have the best win rate, though it doesn't look like a whole load of people are playing it. Though I feel like it maybe has been made more complicated by that recent change to Cult Ambush, allowing you full access to Deep Strike. Your units aren't just locked to dropping in on those Cult Ambush tokens anymore, they can come in anywhere, and I feel like that one helps out all the other detachments more so than it does Outlander Claw. It just actually guarantees that your recycled units will make an impact and not be scrubbed off the board if you deploy the tokens too close. It'd be interesting to see where the data goes after that, but at least early on, I feel like you kind of have to give it to Outlander Claw, the only tournament win and the best win rate. This one's the Transport and Biker type detachment, getting a big boost to objective control. The Bikers get double the OC, and with their fast movement, that means that you can steal a lot of points off things, plus you also get sticky objectives as well. And while it doesn't help their core damage and defense, it does mean that you're a lot more likely to score primary than otherwise. They've got a fun enhancement damage dealer called Assault Commando, which you could have on something like a Biophagus jumping out of a Goliath truck. Rerolling hits for the bearer's unit could maybe be nice enough to make that work. Otherwise, they do have some nice stratagems, a good return to reserves one called Encircling the Prey, which is big, a 4+ reactive invulnerable save to make Jackals harder to destroy, and a nice reactive move 1 of 6 inches for Jackals and Ridge Runners, which can make them a pain to get to grips with. Next up, we've got the Blood Angels. These guys aren't too far away from having their new Codex come out, but until then it seems to be absolutely unequivocally the Sons of Sanguinius, with which they're stomping a whole bunch of tournaments. That's got a win rate of 56%. The Gladius is the one that they seem to debate about a little bit, but that's ridiculously lesser played, and around about 50% wins. Sons of Sanguinius definitely got far stronger after it got that strength improvement, and 6 tournament victories still have it doing very well for the Blood Angels. I do feel like for what it offers the chapter though, is maybe a little bit simplistic. A whole load of its strength comes from the detachment rule. When you make a charge you get +2 to your strength and +1 to your attack, making Space Marine units just crazily more dangerous. Making chainswords go up to strength 6 is a really big breakpoint. As our power fists going to strength 10, you wound a lot of things a lot more easily with that, but the extra attack still means that they're more savage, even if they don't reach a breakpoint like that. Otherwise, Red Rampage is a near auto-use stratagem. If you just need to hit something excessively hard, getting lance and lethal hits means that your units punch up really well. Can be great on things like jump intercessors or small squads of Death Company and things, anything that just needs to take down one heavy target in a single round of combat with extreme prejudice. For the Sisters of Battle, they're another army that's challenging for strongest faction in the game right now, and in general it broadly seems to be very good news for most of their detachments. In terms of what's most played, there's no real contest. Bringers of Flame has a big 57% win rate and is massively more played than the rest. Following that, the next most played is Hallowed Martyrs for 55%, Army of Faith trailing a bit on 42%, and Penitent Host being the least played, but still seems to be putting up respectable win rates. For their top tournament wins, there's 6 Bringers of Flame victories there, and 1 for Hallowed Martyrs. Again, hard to go wrong with boosted fast moving close range firepower with extra hitting power. For the Bringers of Flame, their core rule is the assault keyword on all ranged units and +1 to your strength within 12 inches. That's just excellent for Melters and Flamers, helping them get in range, and you could even key Miracle Dice into the advanced roll if it made a difference, and then Flamers going up to Strength 5 or Strength 6, and Meltagons reaching the Strength 10 breakpoint are both really meaningful as well. They've got lots of good stuff, including a nice Armour of Contempt stratagem which can be good on Paragon suits, a nice fighting enhancement as well. There are plenty of armies to choose to take the very scary combo of the Fire and Fury enhancement on a Jump Caroness with a Hand Flamer, leading a whole bunch of Seraphim with loads of Hand Flamers, and then using the Torrent Devastating Wound stratagem on them. I believe averaging something in the region of 6 or 7 devastating wounds right off the bat. Never mind anything else that those Hand Flamers can do, they're going to make their presence felt against literally anything in the game, and of course utterly destroy any infantry. Next up we've got the Necrons. Before the last balance update, it was fairly even between Hypercrypt and Canoptech Court, though Games Workshop putting up the points cost of the Wraiths and the Doomstalkers seems to have pushed Canoptech Court far down the rankings. Hypercrypt is the most played and the highest win rate at 54%, and then in second place there's Awakened Dynasty, with your leaders leading your squads around for the +1 to hit, and some pretty cool stratagems as well. Canoptech Court with the big rerolls and infiltrating Wraiths and things, only managing a 46% wins currently. For overall tournament wins, there's 3 with Hypercrypt, 1 with Canoptech Court, and 1 with Awakened. It does still seem that Hypercrypt's teleport shenanigans are in ascendancy, even if you can't use that 3-inch Deep Strike stratagem on Catan anymore. The Hypercrypt Legion allows you to hyperphase units, having things jump back into essentially reserves, provided they weren't in engagement range, and having them return to the board, either via Deep Strike if they had it, or marching on from the flanks if they don't. It means that the army is almost guaranteed to score a whole bunch of secondaries for being able to bounce around the board, get into the locations that they need to, particularly with cheap units like individual Locust Destroyers or Death Marks who have the Deep Strike keyword. They've got some good enhancements, including a Risen Tyrant for some damage buffs out of Deep Strike, could be nice with a Plasmancer and Immortals. The Osteoclave Fulcrum to give Deep Strike to a unit, which could be used on, say, a Locust Lord, and a bunch of Destroyers to gain line of sight. They've got some good support for Super Heavies, so often a Monolith or maybe a Tesseract Vault is often in residency. And perhaps the single most important stratagem is Cosmic Precision, 1 command point for a 3-inch Deep Strike, basically guaranteeing that you can get the units where they need to either threaten the enemy or to score, and that's all very scary. For the Black Templars, by far the most played are the Righteous Crusaders, though it does seem to have a slightly lower win rate in tournaments than the Gladius Task Force, 47% for the Crusaders, 51% for Gladius. Seems like Ironstorm Black Templars has really fallen away following the update to the Ironstorm Detachment and the nerfs. The 2 tournament wins that they've had so far since the update were both with Righteous Crusaders, one of them being that enormously crazy 115 model horde list that won the WTC singles event that was kind of cool to see. Overall though, in terms of win rates and things, look like you can absolutely do well with both the Crusaders and the Gladius. Though most people do seem to be leaning towards the Theme Detachment, it does have lots of good stuff. I'll give that one the win here, given that it's got more top level tournament performance. For the Righteous Crusaders, at the start of the first battle round you get to choose one of your Templar vows. Perhaps the most commonly picked one is the Uphold the Honour of the Emperor for a 6+ Feel No Pain and better leadership. Depending on the army though, you could have sustained hits, lethal hits and anti-psyker if you need it. There's 1 command point to switch into any of those vows for a character-led unit as well though, so pop up lethal hits or anti-psyker could be kind of massive in a pinch. Otherwise they've got a very nasty stratagem to lock enemies in melee, which could be a really big deal if that happens. And the 10 Houses Bones is a pretty nice enhancement for 35 points, basically giving a 5+ Feel No Pain if you take Uphold the Honour of the Emperor, and that can make a big chunky Primaris Crusader squad a real pain to put down. You often see it alongside a Castellan and High Marshal Helbrecht, being a bastion of danger and toughness in the middle of the board. Finally, last but not least, we've got the newest kids on the block, the Imperial Agents Codex, which has updated the Death Watch Codex. At time of recording, this hasn't really competitively gone live, so there's no data. And realistically, the strength of the detachments will be super dependent on points cost. If, for example, say Death Watch or the Grey Knight Terminators are weirdly cheap to play, then their own themed detachments will do well. But just in absence of that, it does look like the Imperialis fleet has the most interesting, powerful rules on paper. A few directly helpful things, like the core rule that gives you a +1 to hit against 1 nominated target, and some interesting board control options. There's 2 nice enhancements, one of which allows you to infiltrate a bunch of infantry, which seems scary with Death Watch kill teams, and one to give some Voidfarers deep strike, which means that you could have some Void's men at arms dropping in doing secondaries. The Displace the Field feels like a pretty powerful 1 command point stratagem as well. You could have a Deathwatch kill team gain a 4+ invulnerable save, and then also do a 6-inch move after being shot as if they had fly. That's pretty nice to be able to basically just recoil from shooting and maybe hide behind terrain or backpedal from a charge. And they do have quite a nice damage dealer stratagem as well. They get lance and sustained hits 1 when they attack an enemy unit on an objective, and that's quite a nice melee buff. That'll work really well with the Grey Knight Terminators or the Deathwatch kill teams. Will be interesting to see if it's actually enough to carry the book to be a strong army or not. I feel like people are a bit apprehensive at the moment given the unit access that they've got. In any case, it was interesting to take a look at a few numbers as to which detachments seem to be doing well for each army in the game. Let me know your thoughts and experiences down in the comments. Which detachment does your army find the most success with currently? Is it the one that's in theory the quote-unquote best for your army, or is it one of the others? As mentioned at the start of the video, if you did want to pick up some channel dice, I'll leave a link for them down in the video description. At £28, €33 or $35 plus shipping from the USA, so definitely a bit more cheap if you're actually within the States. It could be fun for some people who want some fancy dice with channel logos. They're made by Baron of Dice, who does make some nice stuff. Otherwise, if you'd like to see more like this, then feel free to subscribe to Auspex Tactics, or certainly keep the regular videos coming. I do tend to post new ones just about every day. Finally, if you have been enjoying all the videos on the channel, I would just like to mention that Auspex Tactics does have a Patreon page as well, and you can find that linked in the video description if you'd like to help support and keep all of these coming. Channel patrons do get a fair few advantages, seeing certain videos early, regular votes to see what sort of things happen next on the channel, and automatic entry into the regular prize giveaways with a chance to win some big model kits each month. If any of that sounds good to you, or you'd just like to help support, the link is down in the video description. In any case, a massive thank you for listening, and I'll hope to see you guys next time.